Welcome back, everybody. It is so great to have everyone here listening again. I am super excited for this conversation with Cate Osborn and Erik Gude about their new book, The ADHD Field Guide for Adults. Yes, we have a lot of parents here listening, but our kids are going to be adults one day. And many of us adults are also neurodivergent. And so we're just going to it's going to be so great on so many levels, so informative in so many ways for our listeners. But I was hoping you would start with just letting everybody know who you are and what you do.
Sure. Oh man, top billing. Hello, my name is Erik Gude. I am an ADHD educator and advocate and author. I have also been working I've been a baker. I've been prop fabricator. I've worn a lot of different hats. And I'm an instrument maker, among other things. I don't know, just general zany guy. Happy to be here. I'm so down in that little
zany guy. If you have to tell people that you're a zany guy.
No, the zaniness is about to come through. The zaniness is about to shine through like Gandalf around Earth.
So hi everybody, my name is Cate Osborn. I go by Catiosaurus online. I am the straight man to Erik's zany. We're the co-hosts of Katie and Erik's Infinite Quest. I'm also the host of Sorry I Missed This on understood.org, a podcast about women and ADHD and how ADHD impacts sex, relationships, intimacy, and more. I am an author. I guess we can both actually say. I'm a speaker, I'm an educator, I'm a performer, and we're so happy to be here with you, Penny.
Thank you so much. I can tell this is going to be a fun half hour together with lots of like real people in real life. So I'm super excited about that. Can we start with maybe what made you decide to write this book?
I answered that last time, so you should.
Well, it largely begins with you. We had talked about writing a book pretty early on. Let me amend that. We didn't talk about writing. We joked about writing.
Yeah.
When we first started the podcast and when we really started ramping up with education and advocacy and doing talks in places, we kind of joked, like, what if we wrote a book, or we would like say a funny sounding line and be like, oh, that's the title of our book, you know? Mm-hmm. So it was kind of a joke. And then I think you just sort of made that joke on a live one day.
I was on a TikTok live and somebody in the comments had talked about, I love your content. I love how you explain stuff. Would you ever write a book? And I said, yeah, I guess I could write a book. And it happened that our fabulous literary agent, Caroline, was in the chat at the time. So she heard me say that. So the next day, like out of a movie, I get an email from this literary agent saying, hey, I would love to help you make that happen. And then it did. And now it's now. And that's pretty cool.
And it's sitting behind us.
Yeah.
And there it is.
And it exists.
And it's out now for everyone who's listening. They can run and grab it as well. What do you think is maybe unique about the book and how you talk about ADHD? How is it different from the way a lot of other people might talk about adult ADHD? Because I have a feeling it's different.
Yeah. So the thing that I really wanted to do from day one when we knew that we were going to be able to write a book, it was really important to us to represent both of ourselves. So Erik and I are really interesting in that we have very sort of backwards experiences to ADHD. Erik got diagnosed very early. He was the ADHD person who struggled in school, who struggled with focus. I was the kind of quintessential high achiever in school, who loved school, got all my self-worth out of school. And so I was diagnosed very late because, like many women, I fell through the cracks. So I wasn't diagnosed into my 30s. And that's two very different experiences with ADHD. And we wanted both of those experiences to be present in the book. And so we actively decided to make the book kind of experimental in a lot of ways. And so the book is not walls of text. It is not dense scientific explanations. It is laid out to be a book that you don't have to read start to finish. It is a book that you can jump around. You can just open to a random page. There's activities. There's little Easter eggs. There's a lot of things that we just chose to include because we knew that if an ADHD reader is coming to a book, sometimes coming to reading as an ADHDer, especially if you are a person who struggled in school, that can feel difficult or can feel like a test or a trial. And we wanted people to be able to approach this book with comfort and with empathy and with self-compassion. And so that's how we designed the book.
Man, I think it came out really well. I'm pretty proud to say I think only 2 pages, in the entire book have just text on it. Every other one is broken up by some, or I suppose just one block of text, everything else is broken up by something, because I think as we want the book to be informative and useful in its own right. But personally, for me, as a person who struggled with reading, it was very important that the book itself be something that is friendly to the reader. The book itself is something that can be a chalk up in the win column for reading a book for whoever ends up purchasing. And I think we succeed in that because I find myself living through it.
I love that. That's my kid. He really struggled in school. And anything now, even at 23, that is remotely like school, like reading a book or anything else is new, but I'm still traumatized by that. I'm not gonna. So I can't wait to get this book for him and see if he'll breeze the pages. I think he will. It's so fun. Let's talk a little bit more about that diagnosis piece, though, because I get a lot of questions as a parent coach about, is it important? Should I get the diagnosis? Should I not get the diagnosis? Is this going to color my kid in school? Should I tell them? Should I not tell them? And I'm really looking forward to your answer to this. I used to moderate the adult forum for Attitude Magazine online when they had forums several years ago. And there were very strong opinions among adults. And a lot of adults felt like their parents failed them in some way around this. So I'm really curious what your insights are.
Yeah, I think Erik and I mean, I'll let Erik answer on his own, but I have very strong opinions. And a lot of it is because I see the harm. I see the hurt. I see the confusion. I see the repercussion of the decision, that the well-intentioned, the compassionate, the I don't want my kid to struggle more than they already are decision to either not get a diagnosis because of the fear of the label or to just not inform a child that they have been diagnosed. Yeah. And I, as somebody who works with young adults and even like women into their 30s, their 40s, their 50s, I see the repercussions of that. And nearly universally, the repercussions are negative. Nearly universally, what we see are people who grew up not understanding themselves, hating themselves, feeling like they were inherently broken or wrong or bad, or that they had missed some like pivotal memo about how to human, when in reality, it was simply ADHD or ADHD and comorbidities. And for me, especially with the research that I do, with the work that I specifically do in conjunction with relationships, with communication, with intimacy, the impact, the researchable impact of low self-esteem, of not understanding oneself, of not having access to the supports and structures that a diagnosis can provide. Like, we see the ripple effect of those decisions throughout the entire person's life, including the ability to develop friendships, including the ability to develop meaningful and lasting relationships. And I don't know, I never want any parent to feel like I am judging or shaming or guilting. Yeah. But I can say that in my, like, both empirically in research and anecdotally via the community, getting your kid the help that they need, speaking with them openly and honestly about their brain, that is pivotal for a well-adjusted and I think happy human being.
Fully co-signed and agreed.
Yeah.
I also, just to lend a second towards sort of empathy for that situation, I can understand that must be a really hard situation to be. Yeah. To not want to label your child as something different or perhaps make them feel like there's something immutably wrong with them, and no matter how hard they try, they're always going to not do as well as they would have liked. I totally understand that, because unlike Cate, I was diagnosed as a kid. I was 15, and there was an element of, oh, well, that's the ball game, folks. I think that's like, I guess this is just the way it is. And I think something that the book seeks to do is to try to educate and clarify the realities of ADHD without dooming you to them, without saying these things are true and this is the rest of your life, buddy. Like, that's just the way it is. You're gonna forget stuff. Ha 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 ha. Who would ever write a blip that said that? So I understand the urge to not want to do that, particularly to your child. But I think any ill effects that a kid might experience from learning of their diagnosis, from getting diagnosed, from the stigma around that, or even just the internal things of thinking, oh, this is a lifelong affliction that I have. Like, this is not going to go anywhere. A lot of that comes with ADHD. That's par for the course when you get diagnosed. And sorting through that and wading through that and coming to terms with that and developing a relationship with that reality is necessary for coming to terms with your ADHD. And it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen at some point, whether it's when you're 25 or 30 or 50 or 88. Like, you're going to have to sit with your ADHD at some point and go, okay, this is real. This is forever. What am I going to do from now, from here? And so starting that process early, it's going to happen at some point. You might as well get cracking at it. And I generally tend on the side, knowing more is always better. So even though there is a stigma and it can be, I don't want to say it can be scary. It is scary to get diagnosis. It's always better to know more than to know less, to know more about yourself. So I don't have kids, so I certainly don't want to tell parents how to raise theirs. But I would generally err on the side of knowing more is always better, and try to make sure that when you break the news to them, or when they find out, whenever it is, that this is not saying that you are doomed to this behavior for the rest of your life, or you're doomed to fail at.
Your brain is built.
Your brain is just built different, and that requires you to know and develop certain strategies. Let's get cracking.
Not to like belabor the point, but I'm also adopted, and growing up, it was never a secret. It was never like a okay, we're gonna sit you down and we're gonna have a tearful conversation where we finally confess to you that you're adopted. Right. No, some families are made this way, some families are made other ways, and in this case, Cate, you're adopted, and so. I think that's also an absolutely valid approach, is like, some kids are adopted, some kids have ADHD, some kids have both, some kids are both.
Yeah.
And so, like, as a parent, I think how you couch it, if you couch it as a doom-based, tearful diagnosis, that may be the lesson. But it can also just be your brain is different than other people's brains. And so we're going to learn how to work with your brain. Like, it doesn't have to be, a big deal, I guess,
Yeah. And in the absence of that, I think kids tell themselves their own story, and it always comes with blame and shame, right?
Yeah.
I can't measure up to what my peers are doing around me.
Yeah.
And for adults, I would imagine it's the same thing too. As an adult, if you're undiagnosed, like thinking, why can't I get my stuff together like other people seem to be able to do?
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think it's so important to let kids know. But it is a very personal decision, and every family has to make that decision for themselves. I want to talk a little bit about masking and how that shows up in adulthood with ADHD. We talk so much about masking when we talk about autism. And we don't, I think, talk about it enough with ADHD, because I think people with ADHD, anybody with a neurodivergence, may be more prone to masking. Is this something you guys have thought about and talked about?
Yeah, we actually talk about masking in the book as well. Masking is interesting because I think so much of it, especially from the ADHD perspective, comes from a feeling that like I must fit in. It is dangerous. It is difficult when I don't. But masking is also inherently tied to privilege, right? If you have access to supports, if you have an accepting community, if you have, a general rate of understanding around you, it is far less likely that you feel the need or pressure to mask. But the less that you feel that way, the more unsafe or the more unstable your predicament may be, the more masking comes into play. And what is interesting is, when you talk about ADHD, we often just talk about ADHD. We don't talk about it in combination with the most common comorbidities, things like depression, anxiety, to a certain extent, autism, sleep disorders, all of these different things. But the feeling of not being able to represent oneself, the feeling of stress and pressure that we are putting on ourselves in order to look like I'm paying attention to, what is my face doing? Am I making enough eye contact? I need to stop shaking my knees and bothering people. That is a exhausting and difficult thing to have to live with. And that becomes another layer of exhaustion, of stress, of I'm thinking about these things. And it can ultimately lead to making the symptoms of ADHD worse, because the more cognitive load that you're putting on yourself, simply trying to appear normal, the more difficult it becomes to appear to be so, which I think is, there's like a really crappy irony in that, I think. Not very fair.
Yeah. I think when it comes to like ADHD mask, I think there are, I was with the,
we know.
Yes. I'm deciding to not do it right now. I'm just like, this is the real me, baby. But I think when it comes to masking, something that's really interesting when you really zoom in to your own personal version of masking when it comes to ADHD is there are sort of two categories. There's active behavior that affects the situation you're in. Bringing something up, interrupting, changing the subject, going over, leaving the room while someone's talking. And then there's just smaller things that are largely insignificant in the grand scale of things. Your facial expression, your posture,
picking your nails,
the way you're, the amount of eye contact you're making. Things that are largely, they don't have any real material effect on the situation. They're just social. You want to make sure the person thinks you're paying attention and is present and all that kind of stuff. And I will say that the more that you come to terms with your ADHD, and particularly the more that you navigate the world as a person who knows themselves and knows how their brain works and knows the types of people that can click with that, you start to fall into your circles of people where you don't have to do as much of or any of that latter type of masking, where you meet people in your life where you can just say, hey, when I'm listening to you, I'm going to not be looking at you.
Yeah.
I'm going to be looking at the floor. I'm going to be looking at a bird flying by, and that's me listening to you. If I look like I'm listening to you, sit here and make appropriate eye contact and nod, I am not listening to you. I am focusing full on looking like I'm listening to you. So when it comes to masking, I just always want to sort of bring up and press the point that as you come to terms with yourself and as you do the hard work of accepting your ADHD and accepting yourself for who you are outside of your ADHD, really, the people that end up being around you are less necessary to mask for in social settings. And it's worth being radically yourself just to get to that point. So anyways, I don't know if there was a point in there somewhere, but I feel like when you're young and you have to go to school all the time and you're just constantly in like what feels like very high stakes social and scholastic environments, you're masking from the moment you get to school till who knows, the moment you leave, maybe after you get home, you're stuck in it or you have practice or something after. Just all day, it really gets to the point where it feels like you cannot be yourself. Yeah. Like yourself is unacceptable. And I have to behave as this other person in order to fit in order to just get by. And to any parents who might be listening to this or younger people who might be listening to this, it's sort of cliche to say it gets better, but it really does. As you get older, you still got to go to job interviews and stuff. But when it comes to like your regular everyday life, masking can be a hugely less impactful part of it. And so I just want to, while we have the ears of parents, just remember, that it'll get better for your kid. They won't have to do it as much as they do now.
Yeah. There were two good nuggets in there that came up for me as you were talking. One is about authenticity and being who you are and accepting who you are. But the other is about finding your people, right? And I think it's so difficult for kids, especially elementary, starting in middle school, to like find your people. You're just stuck with a certain group and there isn't as much opportunity. And I talk to so many parents who are so worried about their kids socially and having friends and all of these things. And like there's this relief, it sounds like, from the way you're talking about this, of actually finding your people and finally feeling like you can really be your true self. You don't have to mask it all.
I think one of the things, like my parents didn't know that I had ADHD. Like
Right.
I started suspecting around the time that I was 14. Actually, this doesn't matter at all to the story, but this is fascinating. Erik's dad was
Graphics.
he was the graphics director at Newsweek. And when I was a teenager, I read an article that was laid out by Erik's dad about young women with ADHD. And I remember reading that article and going like, wow, this really sounds like me. And I went to my parents and I went to my teachers and they all said the same thing, which is like, you're so good in school. There's no possible way that you could have ADHD. And like, haha, I won, everybody. But one of the things that my parents genuinely excelled at was, even without the understanding and the context of ADHD, they knew that I was very curious about a lot of things. They knew that I was interested in music and theater and drama and all of these things. And they really encouraged me to participate not just at my school, but in my community. So growing up, I did a lot of like community theater plays and I was in a lot of like neighborhood groups and that kind of thing. And so what I very quickly discovered was that outside of the walls of my very small, very conservative, very straight-laced Catholic school, there were people, and in particular adults, who were like me. They were inherently curious, inherently interested adults who maybe had jobs that were in the theater, but a lot of them were just adults who would perform by night, like community theater performers. And so I found my community very early. And I had friends of all different ages, from all different backgrounds, from all different walks of life. And I really and truly believe that those experiences of being able to not just seek out extracurriculars from the school, but rather like what is going on in my community as a whole, it made me a better person. I think it made me more curious. It made me more open. But I also realized that there are people like me. And a lot of times when I'm doing the work that I do and I speak a lot at different conventions and that kind of thing, I have so many people who are in their 20s and in their 30s, and they come up to us and they say, I've never heard anybody talk like me before, or I've never heard anybody who feels the same way I do. And my gut instinct is always, I'm so sorry that you never found a way to access that community, because whatever your kid is interested in, whatever they are interested in, Dungeons and Dragons or being a magician or ice skating or, whatever it may be, there are groups, there are people out there who are representative of different neurotypes. And I think just, only having your kid be friends with the 10 people in their class or whatever is just, it's easy to feel isolated and alone when you don't understand how big the world really is maybe what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. And I remember my son, when he was in high school, his special ed teacher reached out to me and said, that he had said that he was the only person in the world like himself at 14, 15 years old. He was like, there's nobody else like me. It's so hard. And we were all like, oh, but you haven't met everybody. There are, how do we help to help people realize that? Because it can be so isolating. Any difference can be so isolating and scary. How do we help kids or adults to be able to be, almost more open? I think when you don't talk about it, then you don't know. You don't know that the person that you're having a conversation with might actually be more like you than you think they are, right? How do we get more open with that?
Well, I think be brazen about talking about it. Just brazen about it. Maybe it's awkward sometimes if you just bring it up with a stranger on the bus, but just be brazen about it. Something that I think, a moment that I don't want to speak for you, but that I experience quite frequently, being an internet TikToker person, I'll post a video about this thing that I do, whatever, it's just some weird thing that I do, where I'm like, sometimes, where I'm going to sleep, I like to imagine that, I can't sleep. So I just imagine that I'm in the middle of the woods and I'm building a cabin. Think about what my ideal cabin would be. And a bunch of other people are like, oh my gosh, I do the same thing. Like, that's amazing. When you have such a weird, specific experience, like being neurodivergent, having ADHD, there are a lot of things like that you kind of feel like you're the only one that does those things until you say it. And then the relief that it's almost like you're giving a gift to the community by saying that out loud. You're giving everybody else who also does that. One, you're giving them confirmation that they are not alone, that they are not the only person that does that. But you're also giving them precedent that it's okay to talk about it.
Yeah.
So when you talk about your own ADHD in any context, you are shifting the Overton window, the window of what people generally consider to be acceptable conversation. And I think we've seen a lot of improvement over the last 5 years. But just talking about it as if it's just a normal thing, because it is. So if you're, late to something with your friend, most of the time we're going to make up some tiny little white lie or something like that. Oh, I couldn't, my car's tire was flat or whatever. But no, tell the truth. Tell them you left your keys in the mailbox somehow.
Yeah.
I don't know how. That's where they were, because some weird confluence of events caused that to be the case. So I think talking about the oddities and strangities of ADHD all across the board, the silly things, the painful things, the serious things, the not so, and just try to get it in the zeitgeist. That was my word. That it's okay to talk about. And not only is it okay to talk about, but you're actively doing a good thing by talking about it. You're healing yourself, which is good.
Yeah.
It's hard to do. But you're also actively affirming to the people around you, they might be having that same experience, and you're the brave one now, and you're giving them precedent to be brave for themselves. And I think that's really important to do in practice.
Yeah. I think also I do a lot of work around ADHD and its impacts on relationships and intimacy and sex. And one of the things that I run into all the time, all ages, right? All ages, is that there is such a stigma around difficult conversations around intimacy, difficult conversations around, sex topics, right?
Yeah.
And something that I have gotten really, really curious about, and something that keeps showing up over and over and over, is that we do not talk. And one of the reasons why I am so passionate about the work that I do is because we do not talk to our kids about how ADHD impacts our ability to give and receive consent. We do not talk about how ADHD can sometimes lead to unsafe or impulsive sexual behaviors that can really impact the entire rest of our lives. But because those can be uncomfortable conversations, because they can be stigmatized conversations, they're often difficult, right? Like if you're a parent, how do you even begin to have that conversation? But like Erik talked about, we have to. And a lot of times the naming of those things and the naming of those issues and talking about those issues, not only does it become I left my keys in the mailbox and I'm giving my friends permission to feel safe around me, but being able to have conversations around things like the impact of consent or impulse control or executive function or rejection sensitivity, it creates safety. You are making your kids safer. You are keeping them safe from harm and from predatory behavior when you are able to name those things explicitly. And so it's hard because I don't know. I don't want to go off on a whole tangent about it, but it really is. It does often become a matter of real actual safety and real actual harm very quickly. And so I think starting with, oh my God, I left my keys in the mailbox, that makes it approachable. It makes it easier. It's a little bit of a bite size. So you can get to the larger issues about talking to your friends about consent or, if something bad is happening, that kind of thing. But yeah, it's I wish more people knew about the impacts of ADHD and intimacy. So Penny, if you want to do another episode, I will preference.
Well, I also
We will definitely do that.
Not to get super crazy serious, but I just wanted to tack one last point. This is a couple years old now. This study came people with the untreated ADHD have a life expectancy that is on average 12 years shorter than their non-ADHD counterparts. So talk about ADHD. Talk about it, work through it like your life depends on it.
Because it does, yeah.
And not to bring it down even more, but here's some more fun facts about ADHD. But just to sort of bring it all the way back to your first question, Penny, when we talk about diagnosing kids with ADHD or medicating kids with ADHD, we also see that kids who are medicated are far less likely to wind up relying on substances as a way of coping, and the rates of addiction and substance use disorder lower a great deal, because what often happens is kids who don't know that they have ADHD, or they're not receiving the supports that they need for ADHD, wind up turning to drugs and alcohol and sex and all sorts of different things in order to feel better and to self-medicate. And so the rates are just lower. When you get your kid diagnosed and when you talk about it, you are actively preventing harm in the future. And I think that there's real beauty in that, a real opportunity as a parent to like really set your kid up for success. Just think about it openly.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I'm so glad you brought up that safety piece, because it's really important when we're talking about diagnosis, and we're talking about telling kids about their brain and how it's different. When we're thinking about medication, which is such a hard choice for parents. And I feel so fortunate that when we were early on in our medication journey many moons ago, I read those statistics. I saw statistics like that. And I really focused in on not just the pros and cons of medicine, but the pros and cons of not doing treatment.
Yeah.
And I'm so thankful for that. And it's something that I think we don't necessarily talk enough about. We don't want to scare parents. We don't want to scare people. But I remember seeing that statistic, Eric, that you had just mentioned recently. And even when you repeated it, I literally, my stomach just got in knots. Like, it's really upsetting and scary, and something that we do need to be talking more about. We do need to change that trajectory for sure.
I also want to, when you brought up, the decision, the pros and cons of not getting or choosing the medication, I think that's a really interesting and good way to do not just pros and cons of medication, but pros and cons. Because when it comes to a lifelong neurodivergent condition, in this case ADHD we're talking about, there is no real such thing as an inaction. Like, if you are deciding whether or not for your child to start taking medications, if you and your child are deciding whether or not to start taking medications, both of those things are active choices. You're either going down the path of medication or going down the path of not medication. The ADHD is still there. There's stuff still happening. It's just your response to that situation is a passive one rather than an active one, which is fine. I don't mean passive in a bad way, but it's still a plan of action. So abstaining from executing on a plan of action is not really a valid strategy. Everything should be talked through. So if you decide to do medication, great. If you decide not to, great. But it should be a deliberate decision that you have made going forward, because there's really no just throwing your hands up and going, well, we'll just let it ride. Like, it's always better to know and plan. Try to embark on the journey of really learning what this thing is and what it's going to mean for your kid's life. And I know it's almost like a sacred thing, learning your brain and learning how to live with it. You only get one.
And we don't talk about it with kids. Like, this has never been part of education or child development or anything. Like, we are not talking to kids about how their brain works, how their nervous system works, executive function.
Right.
I mean, when my kid was in high school, we had a new special ed coordinator. She had been in special ed for 25 years, and I taught her the term executive function. 25 years. And she had, educators don't have to learn about ADHD. Psychiatrists, psychologists don't have to learn about ADHD. They don't have to learn what this is or anything about it. But we need to start teaching kids about their bodies and their brains, because that's, when they can master that, that's how you get to like accomplishing things and being fulfilled and all that stuff. Like, it's so, so important. So lots of conversations about our brains. That's what we need.
And I don't know. And just like, I'm so fascinated by the connection between our brains and our bodies. And we talk about this a little bit in the book. And I don't know, my secret wish is that this book does really well so I can write book 2. Because I want it to be about sex and intimacy in our bodies, because especially if you were the parent of a teenage girl, understanding how the hormonal cycle impacts ADHD and how ADHD impacts the hormonal cycle is pivotal, because like a huge rate of young women with ADHD have PMDD.
Yes, I was just reading about this yesterday.
Yeah, and they don't know about it. And it's, again, like talking about like the guidance counselor who's never heard about executive function. Like, doctors don't tell women about this. Like, we don't have these conversations about, hey, just so you know, your hormones are going to dramatically impact your ADHD and vice versa. And so, yeah, so it's one of the things that I feel so lucky about is that in writing this book, we cover a ton of different topics. We talk about so many different facets of living life with ADHD. And most of them are things that just other people don't talk about, that medical professionals aren't going to mention to you when you get the diagnosis. And it's the stuff that you often find out, 10, 20 years down the road, like, oh my God, that's also an ADHD thing. And then we spent a lot of time and a lot of effort, like trying to include as broad of a picture as possible to give people the supports that they needed in order to break the stigma, to answer questions, to understand their brain better, and to just relieve the pressure around having to mask or feeling like they can't talk about the things that they're going through because they must be the only one. And none of that is true.
So good. So one last question to wrap up. What do each of you think is the most important thing that a parent can hear from you today? And it can be anything. And I know I'm like just one, but like if there is only one thing you could say and then your ability to speak was gone, what would that one thing be?
That's so much pressure.
That's a real hard question for ADHD here, isn't it?
I want to apologize to your editor for having to cut out all of this silence.
Yeah. 20 minutes of silence if we stare overwhelmed.
Or one thing that like you wish you had known as a kid, maybe.
Yeah, I'll go. I mean, mine is like a series of facts, but I think they're all one thing. This is one thing, but it's just not. It's a series of bullet points.
Okay.
But your kid with ADHD is more likely to struggle with eating disorders. They are more likely to have a sleep disorder. They are more likely to struggle with addiction at some point in their life. They are more likely to get into car accidents. They are more likely to be sexually assaulted. And none of those are fun facts. But it is pivotal to never treat ADHD as like a whimsical thing around simply executive dysfunction, because ADHD impacts our ability to live our lives from the moment we struggle to wake up to the minute that we struggle to go to sleep. And informing yourself about all of the different ways that ADHD shows up and can impact your child's life, the more that you educate yourself, the more that you inform yourself, even on the hard topics, even on the stuff that can be really difficult and really heavy and really hard to talk about, it is statistically likely that if you do that, you will save your child's life. That is hard facts. Now I'm no longer allowed to speak. Erik? Oh no, I'm
and your
to speak has been removed magically.
And your book can help with that, by the way, right? Like,
I mean,
read
I
the
like
book.
to think so. I like to think so.
Oh, man.
I mean,
Still thinking?
no. While Erik's thinking of his answer, I will share with you that one of the things that I have been just absolutely overwhelmed about is like, I never thought that like I was doing stuff that mattered. Like, I really didn't. I was like, oh, I make goofy little videos about ADHD, and I got really interested in it from like an academic perspective. But then I started getting real letters from people. Like, I have a box of letters in my office from people literally saying like, hey, I was considering taking my own life. Like I was considering not being here anymore. And then you said a thing in a video that made me understand that what I was going through was my ADHD, or that I had ADHD. I'm getting choked up. Like, you helped with my relationship with my kids or my partners or my parents or my daughter. And it's just because there's so little education around ADHD, and it makes me furious. And so, Penny, like, one of the reasons why we were so excited to talk to you is because you were doing such excellent work and you were really giving parents a groundwork from which to learn and to support their kids. And so like the work that you're doing is so valuable. And we just see it every day. Anyway, what do you got to say to there?
I would say that even if your child was neurotypical in every way, whatever, the longer I learn about this sort of thing, the less I believe that neurotypical really exists.
Yeah.
Are there really neurotypical people out there? Wow. But even if they were, they would still be having a really difficult time just growing up, because growing up is a difficult time.
Yes.
So they're dealing with all of that as well, as I'm sure dear parent, you will know. So part of, I think, your job as the parent of a neurodivergent kid is to be the North Star. They're young. They're new to everything. They're new to life. They're new to newness. So their real, full-body, developed thoughts on everything, including neurodivergence and their own brain and their own ADHD, it's going to be a decade plus, decades, a lifelong journey of really settling on those opinions, on those acceptance things, like accepting that their brain is the way that it is. I mean, I'm 31. I was diagnosed at 15, so I was 16 years in, and I am maybe like 40%, 50%, the way there. Not that I think you ever actually fully finish. So they have a lot of work to do ahead of them. A lot. Right now, your job is to be the North Star. Your job is to be the person whose opinions are settled, even if they're not, coming off as foof and settled in a good way. I mean, bullheadedly mean or something like that. Don't do that. So it is crucial for you to talk to your child about their ADHD in a way that is completely opinion neutral. Well, not opinion neutral. What's the word? Quality neutral. It's not a good or a bad thing.
Yeah.
It is just a true thing. It's like their shoe size or their eye color. It's not about, unfortunately, you have this thing, so this, that, and the other. It's just, it is true. And we are lucky as hell to know that and live in an age where we can know that. So just remember that the way that you think about ADHD is the North Star for how you hope your kid will eventually view their ADHD, or should be. So just remember that they're not gonna finish this journey in front of you. You're watching the very, very beginning part of this. So just hold fast in, you're not completely broken. This isn't a doom sentence for the rest of your life. There are strategies available. But just hold firm in, you are the North Star, and you're setting them up to go on a journey for the rest of their lives. Anyways, I don't know if that was it.
I love that. No, it was great, because it reminds me of one of my favorite quotes, which I never quote accurately, but basically the things we say to our kids become the little voice in their heads. It becomes their, their self-identity. And so we need to come into it. And I made that mistake early on. My kid was diagnosed, he was barely 6 years old. And I was like, oh, I got to fix this. How do I fix this? I need to know what to do. And of course, this was 2008. Like, there was nothing out there to help with that, which is why I ended up doing it, because I became obsessed and I learned a whole lot. And then, I was like, oh, I really did not come at this from a not the right angle, but an efficient or appropriate or helpful angle, right? And so, and the more you know, the better you can do. And and your book is going to help with that. And I'm really excited about that. I'm going to link up all of your links in our show notes at parentingadhdandautism.com. Tell everybody really quick where they can find the book.
The book is called The ADHD Field Guide for Adults. It's available wherever you get your books. We highly recommend that you go to your local bookstore, because we love supporting local bookstores. If they don't have it, you can request that they get it. And if you don't have the scratch to buy a book right now, you can also request that they get it at your local library, because local libraries are awesome and they will get it for you.
The book is available as a regular book. It is also available in an audiobook format that Erik and I recorded. It is also available as an EPUB. So wherever you get those.
accessible for all different types of brains. I love
If you
that.
get the audiobook, I can't remember whether or not I tested out some silly voices. So you get the audiobook, please let us know. Do I do silly voices? How did that work?
How did they land? Yeah. Thank you guys so much for being here, but also just like being unapologetically yourselves so that everybody else knows that they can also do that too. Like that gives other people permission. And I just love that so much. And yeah, we are talking so much more about it than we used to. And I'm so glad. And I'm so grateful for what you guys are doing. I will see everybody next time. Take good care.
Bye, everybody.